Good morning, world. Okay, today, Jordan hasn't seemed to been able to join me today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first give you a little preview of what is happening in Helena, Montana, weekend after next. And one of the things that I have done is that I have prepared bookmarks for everybody who's attending. Every person who attends. Good morning, Art. Nice to see you. Everyone who attends will receive a bookmark. Each one has a different quote on it. And so I'm going to read the quotes and I will tell you what pages they can be found on in the Red Book. These are all quotes from the Red Book. They're all quotes from chapters 1 through 3 of the Red Book. And I want you to be able to find them if you want to. Good morning, Kathy. Nice to see you today. And so I'm going to just read them off. And here's the idea. We're going to put these in a bowl or something like that. And everybody will get their own bookmark. But every bookmark will be different. It will have a different quote on it. So the quote that a person gets at the confluence will, by synchronicity, be meant for them specifically. With the option, somewhat like the Shinto religion, where if you're at a Shinto shrine and you buy a fortune and you don't like the fortune, you can take the fortune and tie it in a knot on a tree as you leave the shrine. So when you're at a Shinto shrine in Japan, you often see the trees covered with these tied on fortunes that people didn't like. But for the most part, I think people will like these. And so this is by synchronicity what they will get. I'm going to read them off quickly. I'm intentionally doing this to use a little bit of time in the hope that Jordan Hoggard will show up this morning so that he can comment on this part of of Answer to Job call that's about God's unconsciousness. It's a very controversial section of Answer to Job, and it's obviously one of the passages that got Dr. Jung in trouble with the clergy. But I'll just read these quotes. So I'm reading quotes from the bookmarks that I've prepared for Helena for next week after next. So here's the first one. The wealth of the soul exists in images. And that's from Folio 232, Reader's Edition 130. My friends, it is wise to nourish the soul, otherwise you will breed dragons and devils in your heart. And this is from Folio 232, Reader's Edition 130. And with this one, I succeeded in doing an illumination, which at the bottom you can see the devil and you can see the heart and you can see the dragon too. I'm not sure where's the dragon. Oh, okay. It's at the end of the word dragons. So there it is. And so that was a successful illumination. I'm not much of a drawer, so so it wasn't the best, but anyway, it's not bad. So Folio 232, Reader's Edition 130. He who possesses the image of the world possesses half the world. even if his humanity is poor and owns nothing. Folio 232, Reader's Edition 130. I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 126. You took away where I thought to take hold, and you gave me where I did not expect anything. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. The image of the world is half the world. Folio 232, Reader's Edition 129. I am ignorant of your mystery. Forgive me if I speak as if I'm in a dream like a drunkard. Are you God? That's on page Folio 233, Reader's Edition 131. I'm reading quotes from the Red Book, giving you citations to both the Folio edition and the Reader's Edition. And time and again, you brought fate from new and unexpected quarters. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. He who strives only for things will sink into poverty as outer wealth increases, and his soul will be afflicted. That's in footnote 43, Folio 232, Reader's Edition 130. There is only one way, and that is your way. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. If we possess the image of a thing, we possess half the thing. Folio 232, Reader's Edition 129. At every decisive moment, you let me believe in myself. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. Woe betide those who live by way of examples. Life is not with them. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. You upheld my belief when I was alone and near despair. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. And time and again, I lost the path and found it again where I would never have foreseen it. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. Where I sowed, you robbed me of the harvest, and where I did not sow, you give me fruit 100-fold. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. He could find his soul in desire itself, but not in the objects of desire. Folio 232, Reader's Edition 129. The spirit of this time is your measure, but the spirit of the depths surpasses it at both ends. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132 to 133. My friends, do you guess to what solitude we ascend? Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. I had to become aware that I had lost my soul. Folio 232, Reader's Edition 129. Dreams are the guiding words of the soul. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. Even the dearest are themselves not the goal and end of the love that goes on seeking. They are symbols of their own souls. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. I shall learn that my soul finally lies behind everything. And if I cross the world, I am ultimately doing this to find my soul. Folio 233, Reader's Edition 132. God is an image, and those who worship him must worship him in the image of the supreme meaning. Folio 229, Reader's Edition 120. The supreme meaning is the path, the way, and the bridge to what is to come. Folio 229, Reader's Edition 120. Do you believe, person of this time, that laughter is lower than worship? Where is your measure, false measurer? Folio 230, Reader's Edition 122. Okay, I'm reading bookmarks that I'm giving at the Confluence weekend after next, and each person will receive one. Each one will be different. The supreme meaning is not a meaning and not an absurdity. It is image and force in one, magnificence and force together. Folio 230, Reader's Edition 120. The supreme meaning is the beginning and the end. It is the bridge of going across and fulfillment. Folio 230, Reader's Edition 120. You are the image of the unending world. All the last mysteries of becoming and passing away live in you. Folio 230, Reader's Edition 121. More than halfway through. The image of God has a shadow. The supreme meaning is real and casts a shadow. For what can be actual and corporeal and have no shadow? Folio 230, Reader's Edition 120. May each go his own way. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. A book can swing even a whole world if written in fire and blood. This is from footnote 44, and it's a quote from the diary or the journal of Carrie Baines, who was the daughter of one of Dr. Jung's first disciples, I would say. And so this is on Folio 232, Reader's Edition 130. Who knows the way to the eternally fruitful climes of the soul? Folio 231, Reader's Edition 126. The way is within us, but not in God's, nor in teachings, nor in laws. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. The shadow is nonsense. It lacks force and has no continued existence through itself. But nonsense is the inseparable and undying brother of the supreme meaning. Folio 230 and Reader's Edition 120. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. The image of God throws a shadow that is just as great as itself. Folio 230, Reader's Edition 120. If you live according to an example, you thus live the life of that example. But who should live your own life if not yourself? So live yourselves. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. The signposts have all fallen. Unblazed trails lie before us. Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. Do you not know that you yourselves are the fertile acre which bears everything that avails you? Folio 231, Reader's Edition 125. The supreme meaning is great and small. It is wide as the space of the starry sky, heavens, and as narrow as the cell of the living body. Folio 230, Reader's Edition 120. But one thing you must know, the one thing I have learned is that one must live this life. And somehow miraculously, Folio 232, Reader's Edition 128. I found the right way. It led me to you, to my soul. Folio 232, Reader's Edition 125. Yes, 125. There is no other way. All other ways are false paths. And I don't seem to have written the source there. The creators, let's see, that's the backside. I don't want to read the backside. Okay. This life is the way, the long sought after way to the unfathomable, which we call divine. And that's Folio 232, Reader's Edition 128. My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak. I call you. Are you there? I have returned. That is, sorry, I don't have the link to that, but that is the beginning of the second paragraph of the second chapter of the Red Book. And let's see. Okay, there's one more bonus one. Somebody's going to get a very big one because it has the longest quote. The other gods died of their temporality, yet the supreme meaning never dies. It turns into meaning and then into absurdity. And out of the fire and blood of their collision, the supreme meaning rises up, rejuvenated anew. And it is Folio 231, Reader's Edition 121. Okay, so that is a reading of the bookmarks that I am in the process of making for the people who do come to the Confluence. Everyone will get a chance to draw one, and by synchronicity, that will be the one intended for them, for what it's worth. Okay, the reason I delayed a little bit is I wanted to give people some time to gather, and give Jordan some time to get on, because these next couple of paragraphs of Answer to Job are humdingers, and probably they're the beginning of the ideas which got Dr. Jung in heap big trouble with the clergy. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. This paragraph 659, we're exactly halfway through Answer to Job now, because it ends at 758, or this is 659. So we have 100 paragraphs to go. And this one paragraph is 2 pages long. So I'm going to read it right through and then come back and disambiguate it, I guess, sort of break it into chunks. So first, a reading of paragraph 659. The fact of God's unconsciousness throws a peculiar light on the doctrine of salvation. Man is not so much delivered from his sins, even if he is baptized in the prescribed manner and thus washed clean, as delivered from fear of the consequences of sin, that is, from the wrath of God. Consequently, the work of salvation is intended to save man from the fear of God. This is certainly possible where the belief in a loving Father who has sent his only begotten Son to rescue the human race has repressed the persistent traces of the old Yahweh and his dangerous effects. Such belief, however, presupposes a lack of reflection or a sacrificium intellectus, a sacrifice of the intellect. And it appears questionable whether either of them can be morally justified. You should never forget that it was Christ himself who taught us to make usurious use of the talents entrusted to us and not hide them in the ground. One ought not to make oneself out to be more stupid and more unconscious than one really is. For in all other aspects, we are called upon to be alert, critical, and self-aware, so as not to fall into temptation, and to examine the spirits who want to gain influence over us and see whether they are of God, so that we may recognize the mistakes we make. It even needs superhuman intelligence to avoid the cunning snares of Satan. These obligations inevitably sharpen our understanding, our love of truth, and the urge to know, which as well as being genuine human virtues, are quite possibly effects of that spirit which searches everything, even the depths of God. These intellectual and moral capacities are themselves of a divine nature and therefore cannot and must not be cut off. It is just by following Christian morality that one gets into the worst collisions of duty. Only those who habitually make five an even number can escape them. The fact that Christian ethics leads to collisions of duty speaks in its favor. By engendering insoluble conflicts and consequently an affliction animi, it brings man nearer to a knowledge of God. All opposites are of God. Therefore, man must bend to this burden, and in so doing, he finds that God in his oppositeness has taken possession of him, incarnated himself in him. He becomes a vessel filled with divine conflict. We rightly associate the idea of suffering with a state in which the opposites violently collide with one another, and we hesitate to describe such a painful experience as being redeemed. Yet it cannot be denied that the great symbol of the Christian faith, the cross, upon which hangs the suffering figure of the Redeemer, has been emphatically held up before the eyes of Christians for nearly 2,000 years. This picture is completed by the two thieves, one of whom goes down to hell, the other into paradise. One could hardly imagine a better representation of the oppositeness of the central Christian symbol. Why this inevitable product of Christian psychology should signify redemption is difficult to see, except that the conscious recognition of the opposites, painful though it may be at the moment, does bring with it definite feeling of deliverance. It is, on the one hand, a deliverance from the distressing state of dull and helpless unconsciousness, and on the other hand, a growing awareness of God's oppositeness, in which man can participate if he does not shrink from being wounded by the dividing sword, which is Christ. Only through the most extreme and most menacing conflict does the Christian experience deliverance into divinity, always provided that he does not break, but accepts the burden of being marked out by God. In this way alone can the Imago Dei realize itself in him, and God become man. The seventh petition in the Lord's Prayer, "But deliver us from evil," is to be understood in the same sense as Christ's prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Quote, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me," unquote. In principle, it does not seem to fit God's purpose to exempt a man from conflict and hence from evil. It is altogether human to express such a desire, but it must not be made into a principle because it is directed against God's will and rests only on human weakness and fear. Fear is certainly justified up to a point, for to make the conflict complete, there must be doubt and uncertainty as to whether man's strength is not being overtaxed. Paragraph 660. Because the Imago Dei pervades the whole human sphere and makes mankind its involuntary exponent, it is just possible that the 400-year schism in the church and the present division of the political world into two hostile camps are both expressions of the unrecognized polarity of the dominant archetype. Okay, I'm going to stop that paragraph. Let me get a drink and then I'll go back and talk about it. I'm sure you found it quite interesting, as I do. All right, so I'm going back to the beginning of paragraph 659 of Answer to Job. This is the book where I'm using, the 10th anniversary or the 50th anniversary edition of Answer to Job. And I'm just going to go through it sentence by sentence and we'll talk about it. The fact of God's unconsciousness throws a peculiar light on the doctrine of salvation. Man is not so much delivered from his sins, even if he is baptized in the prescribed manner and thus washed clean, as delivered from the fear of the consequences of sin, that is, from the wrath of God. Okay, so right away, Dr. Jung is taking away the magical thinking that has governed the church for the last 2,000 years. And he puts into another context the meaning of the Christian message. And so so the idea is that you will be freed from the fear of God and the fear of punishment for your sins, but nonetheless, you're still going to the cross and you're still making your sacrifice. And so anyway, I'll read that sentence again. Consequently, the work of salvation is intended to save man from the fear of God. So you're not no longer afraid of what God might do. There's certainly, certainly, this is certainly possible where the belief in a loving Father who has sent his only begotten Son to rescue the human race has repressed the persistent traces of the old Yahweh and his dangerous effects. So what Dr. Jung is saying is that at the beginning of the Christian era, the idea of redemption from sins is a way to get out from under this old and dangerous God, Yahweh, that Job faced. And to repress that part of God, because it didn't go away, it just went deeply into the unconscious. Such a belief, however, presupposes a lack of reflection or sacrificium intellectus, and it appears questionable whether either of them can be morally justified. So the point is that we run into these conflicts of duty in the Ten Commandments and pretty much in everything that is moral in life, because how should I read "Thou shalt not kill" and then go to Vietnam as a U.S. Marine ready to kill my enemy? That's a big one, and it is certainly a conflict of duty, in the sense that my government wants me to kill other people, and yet we are precluded by the Ten Commandments from doing that. And so this is the kind of splitting that we have to all face as human beings. And as we look at the Ukraine-Russia war now, is it right to be hoping for the death of young Russians who are going into Ukraine in tanks that are old and not up to the standard of modern warfare, and therefore let them be killed off by these switchblade drones that don't even require a man to be physically in it? That's certainly a moral conflict. And I know I don't hold any grudge against 18-year-old Russian soldiers, surely not. But I know the type of world that Vladimir Putin would force upon us. We know that from watching the Soviet Union for the last 100 years. And Vladimir Putin wants to bring us back to those times, the worst of those times. And so that can't be countenanced. And so it really is, it's fate. It's also the message of the Bhagavad Gita, where the Bhagavad Gita, the entire book takes place in a numinous instant in which the military leader Arjuna is being lectured by Krishna, who is the god in that case. And Arjuna is conflicted because on both sides of the battlefield, there are his kinsmen. And in order for him to go into the battle and succeed, he will have to kill some of his kinsmen. And Krishna says, yep, that's the way it is. And so get on with it, basically. That's the message of the Bhagavad Gita. And so when you come to that moment in your life, you have to face up to it and do what's called for by fate. And that's that. But Dr. Jung is here saying this is presupposes a lack of reflection or a sacrificium intellectus. So in other words, Christians are asked to not think logically, to just go with it. And it's, it really becomes a moral question whether you can do what is you're called upon to do, but you have to make a decision about how you're going to deal with these conflicts of duty. And those, when you face them, you are in effect making a godly decision. So reading on. We should never forget that it was Christ himself who taught us to make usurious use of the talents entrusted to us and not hide them in the ground. One ought not to make oneself out to be more stupid and more unconscious than one really is, for in all other aspects we are called upon to be alert, critical, and self-aware, so as not to fall into temptation. And so the point here is that under the Christian philosophy, you're called upon to bring out your talents and to make them effective in the world. And I know many people, I've known many people during my lifetime who are afraid to make waves. They don't want to be seen, or they don't want to make any ruckus or raise a point, even though they might be right. We know a lot of these people, of course, they have come into life and they will go away and they won't have made a ripple, but that's not what we're called upon to do. What we're called upon to do is the best with what we have. And we may be afflicted by something, as one of my friends who's watching this session today is, but whatever that affliction is, we're called upon to do the best that we can, no matter what. And Genesis commandment is not accurately translated, thou shalt not murder, and numerous other challenges in scribe translation. Still moral conflicts, transient wordplay. Yep. And we have been manipulated by the clergy for thousands of years to do what they want us to do. And through a variety of wordplay, including the wordplay that says that the word is God. Well, the word isn't God. The word is a structure on which we can develop for ourselves an image of God, but it is not God. And so it's magnificence and force together, which makes up the supreme meaning. And that's what I was reading earlier in this session. So I urge you, if you weren't here at the beginning when I was reading these quotes that I'm going to give people in Helena, I urge you to go back and listen to the beginning of this video, because there you will hear some of these profound statements that appear in the Red Book. And so Jung says one ought not to make oneself out to be more stupid and more unconscious than one really is. For in all other aspects, we are called upon to be alert, critical, and self-aware, so as not to fall into temptation, and to examine the spirits who want to gain influence over us and see whether they are of God. Now, this is a reference to, and it is in the footnote as well, it's a reference to one of Dr. Jung's favorite biblical passages, which is found in the first letter of John, 1 John. It's not the book of John, it's the first letter of John, chapter 4, verse 1, which says, examine the spirits, whether they be of God or not. And so the point is that we feel spirits welling up inside us all the time. And we ought to, as we feel those spirits welling up inside us, we should say, stop, wait, let me think about this. Is this what God would want on this earth in these human beings? That's what it means. And so if it's not, then it's not of God, and you have to make a decision. And Dr. Jung felt that if you had developed a strong enough ego, so by the time you've reached adulthood, you should be able to make a distinction between right and wrong. So let me see what's next here. If it even needs superhuman intelligence to avoid the cunning snares of Satan. And so the cunning snares of Satan, obviously, the Russian army has fallen into the snare of Satan by agreeing to attack their cousins, uncles, and brothers in Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union until 1989. And so they were always a part of that collective. But now they're called upon to step away from that, from those ideas. And we have to admire them for that. Okay, these obligations inevitably sharpen our understanding, our love of truth, and the urge to know, which, as well as being genuine human virtues, are quite possibly effects of that spirit which searches everything, even the depths of God. And that the quote from that comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 10, for your information. 1 Corinthians 2:10. And so we really have to examine these spirits. They come up inside us. They don't get spoken from the heavens, although you can get a disembodied voice in a dream, or just hearing it as you're walking along the street in a vision that says, thou shalt do such and such, or wouldn't it be fun to do such and such? But if you hear yourself saying to you, wouldn't it be fun to do X? You should take a step back and say, yeah, maybe that wouldn't be such a good idea, though. So these intellectual and moral capacities are themselves of a divine nature, and therefore cannot and must not be cut off. Okay, so the fact that we have these moral conflicts is of the divine, because both decisions, both ways, are of God. They're God's teaching. And so it is divine. We have to be able to differentiate, and that's the responsibility of adulthood. And so whatever you're doing, whatever political party you're supporting, whatever political attitude you are backing, you really have to examine, what is it that makes you want to have that position, and whether that position is really what God wants. And we see it on our cable television every day now, and most recently has been these murders in Uvalde, Texas, and in Buffalo, New York, and on the West Coast in that Presbyterian church. If you have an urge to go shoot somebody or kill a bunch of little kids, you better rethink that. That's not God that's pushing you. That's the devil. All right, these intellectual and moral capacities are themselves of a divine nature, and therefore cannot and must not be cut off. It is just by following Christian morality that one gets into the worst collisions of duty. Okay, just stating a fact that if we try to follow the specific rules of Christian morality, we're going to have a hard time. And there are difficult collisions of duty. Only those who habitually make 5 an even number can escape them. Okay, so here he's using sort of a parable, saying if you can make 5 an even number in your head, then you can escape these moral conflicts. But if you can't make it an even number, then you're going to be faced with them. And so the fact that Christian ethics leads to collision of duties speaks in its favor by engendering insoluble conflicts and consequently an afflictio animi. It brings man nearer to a knowledge of God. Okay, so this is God's problem, that everything is built, all psychic energy is built on conflicts of duality. And it's only because we have that duality that we have to, that we get our psychic energy. And so the very energy that causes me to give this talk as a monologue is that I know that Christian doctrine, as it's normally taught, did not serve me well during my lifetime. And Dr. Jung's perceptions of these things makes a lot more sense to me than the Christian church ever did. And I think back, I'll be bringing this up in our confluence, but I think back to a time in 1970 when I was at a place called LZ Baldy, or Combat Base Baldy, in Vietnam. And it was the main base of the 5th Marine Regiment, the 5th Marines. And I was assigned to that location. And the chaplain had up on the hill a beautiful chapel that had been built out of sandbags. The Navy had issued him pieces of saran wrap that had fake stained glass windows on the saran wrap so that he could make stained glass windows in the bunker over the shooting ports, I guess you would say. So if it came to a fight, you could always, knock out those stained glass windows and use them for a fighting station. But this never happened, and the chapel was up on the hill, and it was a beautiful location. It looked out over the South China Sea, and or the East China Sea, perhaps. And it was a tropical paradise, actually. And I happened to go up there one time, I forget what for, and the chaplain was not there. So I didn't see anybody around, but I saw this chapel, which had pews in it, and altar, the whole smash of a chapel. And but it happened that my duty at that time was to be the commanding officer of the prisoner of war camp that we maintained in this combat base. And so that required me as an intelligence officer to appear at the colonel's briefing every morning at 8 a.m. and tell him of anything that we might have learned by interrogation of prisoners. And every Monday, the chaplain, who was, I think he was probably a commander in the U.S. Navy, who was assigned to the Marine Corps, that chaplain, the Marine Corps doesn't have chaplains. The Marine Corps would say if the Marine Corps wanted you to have a chaplain, it would have issued you one. Well, it didn't issue us one, but we're part of the Naval Service. So the Naval Service, the Navy maintains chaplains who also serve the Marine Corps. And so this chaplain would come to the colonel's briefing every Monday, and he said, well, we had 11 or 12 people at chapel yesterday out of 5,000. Just imagine, out of 5,000 Marines. And remember the old saw, there are no atheists in foxholes. And so just imagine that out of 5,000 men, only 11 or 12 a week were actually showing up for Sunday services. And, quite honestly, I never went. And I'm sure at that day and age, Colonel Judge would just shrug and say, well, if they don't want to go to church, they don't want to go to church. I'm not going to force them. And he probably gave that Navy commander a good fitness report for his service on LZ Baldy, American Combat Base Baldy. But the reality is that chaplain had entirely failed in his duty, because his duty was the spiritual well-being of the entire regiment, not only Christians, not only Jews, everybody that was there. And he was not servicing that spiritual need. I recognize that now after 50 years looking back on it, because it always seemed odd that he got away with saying to Colonel Judge, I only had 11 or 12 Marines in chapel yesterday. And Colonel Judge would just go on to the next topic. He wouldn't say anything about that. And, with 2020 hindsight, I say, well, my God, what are you doing to support the spiritual needs of the regiment? And I'm sure that chaplain would have no answer. And yet we now know that there are many things that can support your spiritual needs, not only religion, but art and psychology and all kinds of things. And this is one of the main topics that we're going to be covering in our confluence, which is that all religions and all arts and all psychology point to the same thing, and that's the healing power of the unconscious. And people don't have to understand that point, but they do need to understand. They do need to have that need supported. And I remember that when it came to December of the year 1970, and the Bob Hope Show was coming to Vietnam. Some of you may remember this, but every Christmas time, Bob Hope, the comedian entertainer, would pull together a bunch of musicians and dancers and so on, and they would make a tour of Vietnam and put on a show for the troops. And at some point in early December, I learned that I wasn't going to be allowed to go to the Bob Hope show because there were only 10,000 seats, and we had lots more Marines than that in I Corps in the northern part of Vietnam. And so my unit, or me, hadn't been selected for that show. And I remember being spiritually crushed by that, because I'd watched that show many times in previous years. I not being allowed to go crushed me spiritually at that point in time. But the interesting thing is, by synchronicity, I got quite ill at that time. I had a very serious case of dysentery, and ultimately I had to be medevaced to the Navy hospital in Da Nang, which is called 1st Medical Battalion. And I spent 11 days up there and lost 17 pounds in 11 days, if you can imagine that. And so when I was released from that hospital, I weighed 157 pounds. I now weigh about 220. So you can understand how thin I was at that moment. But because I was in the hospital, and it was 2 or 3 days before the Bob Hope show, they were able to stop my discharge of all kinds of things. We won't go into that. And so I was allowed to go to the Bob Hope show in hospital pajamas. So if you ever saw one of those shows with the hospital, the people that were in the hospital down in front, I was one of those guys, and I did get to see the Bob Hope show, and it really raised my spirits. I remember that. And so we have to understand that things like music and painting, what have you, all those things support us spiritually. And yet I'm sure that that chaplain, and probably every chaplain in the U.S. Navy today, has no clue about that. And I kind of know this because the Naval Academy Chapel is just 2 miles over here from me. And I've found in the last few years that the chaplain corps of the Navy has been taken over by fundamentalists. And they get into the chapel every Sunday morning, and they're giving this fundamentalist harangue. And I can't go there anymore when there's a service going on. I do go to the chapel. It raises my spirits when nobody's there, as you probably know, but I can't go there when there's a Navy chaplain. And so some major changes have to be made in our perception of what it means to be spiritually supported by the chaplain. And the word chaplain, by its definition, means that the individual involved isn't a pastor of this or that church. They're not a Southern Baptist. They're called upon, if someone is dying on the battlefield and they look at their dog tags and it says they're Jewish, they have to pray the Kaddish for that person. And if it says they're Catholic, then they have to pray the rosary or whatever it is, or the last rites. And they have to do that regardless of their own denomination, but because they're called upon to support the spiritual needs of those people. But here was a man that was responsible for the spiritual needs of 5,000 Marines, and he was only getting to 11 or 12. In 50-year retrospect, or 52 years since that was where I was, I now realize that that is a fundamental flaw in the way we think about the chaplain corps in the Navy, and probably the Army and the Air Force as well. And it's something that people need to start thinking about. It's a serious, serious deficiency. And it is the primary topic of our confluence, which is the spiritual well-being of everyone. And it means that there's no religion that has the perfect right answer. They all have a right answer that finds the path to bring us closer to our unconscious, which has the healing power in which we can live and support our lives. And, I just remember how euphoric I was when I got to go to this Bob Hope show. And as I recall, at that time, I had a tube down my throat, through my stomach and into my large intestine, because they were looking for parasites. So this tube was sticking out of my mouth. And I have very little recollection of that tube, although I do remember it. But I do have recollection of the euphoria I felt after feeling so depressed that I had been denied the right to go to the Bob Hope show. Now I got to go to it. And wow, my spirits just soared because of that. And so that's what is the numinous thing, Kathy, that our confluence is about. And it's really the essence of Dr. Jung's entire oeuvre. Everything in Jungian psychology points to this one fact, which is to bring us closer to the healing power of the unconscious, and recognize that there are many ways to get there. One way is through Jungian psychology, but any religion can get you there. Any art can get you there. Proper education and wonderful teachers can get you there. And, as Dr. Jung said in one of those quotes, why do you think that worship is higher than laughter? Where's your measure, false measure? Laughter is a spiritual thing, and we have to understand that. So, anyway, I'm only halfway through this paragraph, so I guess I waxed philosophic there for a while. Most of you didn't go away. So all opposites are of God. Therefore, man must bend to do this burden. And in so doing, he finds that God, in his oppositeness, has taken possession of him, incarnated himself in him. And so he becomes a vessel filled with divine conflict. So is there anyone out there that isn't filled with divine conflict? I think we all are afflicted that way. So that's the point, that by bending to the burden of those conflicts, we actually have an experience of God, because everything in the universe is based on energy which is created by conflict, fire and blood. And And so we need to understand that. And then we need to, first of all, let's say, forgive our spouse, whether man or woman, because our spouse has been selected to be a counterpoint to our point of view. And so while there's a honeymoon period, when you have this numinous euphoria about the possibility that you can be together and have sex together and all these wonderful things, but after about 8 or 10 weeks, the honeymoon wears off, and then you have to figure out how are you going to live with this person for the next 50 or more years. And there will be conflicts. And so I have this joke that I have on a mug that it says, if a man speaks in the desert and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? And the answer to the question is yes, he is still wrong. And the reason is because all of us only represent half of a whole. And so it's inevitable that you're going to think things that aren't quite right, and you're going to have conflicts with your spouse. They can be low grade, they can be negotiated, let's hope, in most cases, but those conflicts are endemic to the sanctity of marriage. And when you say that you're going to have and to hold this person for your life, it means that you're going to work out these conflicts and not make them so they destroy your marriage and your life. And this is what we failed to see. And this week I saw Dr. Jordan Peterson giving one of his sermons in which he said, well, if there's disloyalty, if your spouse strays, then that's the end of it. Well, that's not the end of it, and it shouldn't be the end of it, because there can be a reconciliation. I'm not saying that there can be forgiveness, and this conflict that I'm talking about is actually the topic of the play in which I'm performing on the 12th of June. I'm going to make every effort to broadcast the play live on this YouTube channel from my cell phone. I'm going to ask my wife to hold the cell phone and try to make this broadcast possible. But I'm not sure I'll have Wi-Fi in the theater. But if we can do it successfully, and I think Tim Holmes is going to attempt to do the same thing on his YouTube channel, which is timholmesstudio.com. We're both going to try to broadcast the play live, and we will be making video of it. So, in the subsequent weeks, we'll definitely be putting up a version of the play, even if we can't broadcast it live. But one of the key points is the reconciliation of opposites and how you go about doing that. And it's importantly done by conversation, and sometimes by analysis, but sometimes by arguing with yourself over a painter's easel, or however you do it. Sometimes by conversation with your pastor. But just because a spouse strays does not necessarily mean that there is an end at that point. And I couldn't disagree more with Jordan Peterson on that point. I apologize to Dr. Peterson, but I represent the opposite position of what he says. Okay, so carrying on in this paragraph, we rightly associate the idea of suffering with a state in which the opposites violently collide with one another, and we hesitate to describe such a painful experience as being redeemed. Okay, so, the fact is that we have painful conflicts all the time in our lives and in our own perception of what we should be doing from minute to minute. And it's very hard to think that that is redeemed. But, if you think that that is the duty of God to make that decision, then you can see the redemption in it. And one thing Dr. Jung was worried about at the end of this book in paragraph 758 is that if too many people got the idea that they were making decisions of God, then there would be many conflicts and unnecessary inflations. But I'm not saying this to inflate you. I'm saying this to give you a heads up that this is what's going on. And everyone, it's true of everyone. So in India, when people bow to one another with folded hands, they're showing their respect for the God in the other person. And, that's maybe something that we ought to introduce into Western behavior as well, that, I see the divinity in you, and I'm going to give you respect to understand what your point of view is with respect to everything that you say. Namaste. Okay, that's the way Indians live their lives. And, what's wrong with that? We can learn a lot from other religions. I look at Islam and I say, what could be wrong with praying 5 times a day? There's nothing wrong with that either. So, okay. Is that redemption? Well, redemption is if you can reconcile, then you are redeemed over that conflict at least. So find a way, talk it out, figure out what's wrong and how to fix it. So reading on, yet it cannot be denied that the great symbol of the Christian faith, the cross, upon which hangs the suffering figure of the Redeemer, has been emphatically held up before the eyes of Christians for nearly 2,000 years. This picture is completed by the 2 thieves, one of whom goes down to hell, the other to paradise. One could hardly imagine a better representation of the oppositeness of the central Christian symbol. And so we can imagine the oppositeness that's involved in the war crime trial of the young Russian soldier a couple weeks back in Ukraine. He thought he was doing his duty, and he's in a war, and maybe he was told by his superiors to kill that man. And there are many conflicts that arise in soldiers in battle. And, what is right about killing someone else? It's a very, very difficult conundrum to deal with. And so, we're all, certainly every soldier, every person that's in the military understands that. Maybe if you're an F-18 pilot like the Blue Angels, you can sublimate it a little bit because you're at 1,000 feet above the ground and you're pickling a bomb to drop, but you don't know what that bomb is landing on. You don't know whether they're good people or bad people at the other end of the trajectory of that bomb. And that's a conflict. I mean, when you're on the ground, as all Marines are, or not all Marines, because we have flying Marines as well, but for all ground Marines, we're all infantry first. And so we're all up close and personal to that conflict. And we have to make a judgment about it in our own psyches. And it's not an easy one to resolve. And, probably we need a chaplain to help us with that. It doesn't mean that we have to suffer his harangue as a fundamentalist Southern Baptist, but it does mean that he has a duty to help us resolve this fundamental conflict about thou shalt not kill. So reading on. Why this inevitable product of Christian psychology should signify redemption is difficult to see, except that the conscious recognition of the opposites, painful though it may be at the moment, does bring with it a definite feeling of deliverance. Okay, so, you can recognize the opposites and then make your own decision, and that can deliver you. And, recognizing that fundamental conflict, you let your psyche give you the answer of what you have to do in that situation. It is, on the one hand, a deliverance from the distressing state of dull and helpless unconsciousness, and on the other hand, a growing awareness of God's oppositeness, in which man can participate if he does not shrink from being wounded by the dividing sword, which is Christ. So Christ said that I came with a sword, okay, and to divide mother against daughter, father against son, and to point out this oppositeness, which is what, after all, does produce psychic energy. And so, it very much comports with Jungian psychology. Now, it doesn't necessarily comport with Freudian psychology, because Freudians these days would simply, if they think you have a conflict and they're psychiatrists, they may give you a drug and just dull, make you so you're not conscious of it. But it means that you're not dealing with the issue yourself, and that's a problem. So reading on. Only through the most extreme and most menacing conflict does the Christian experience deliverance into divinity, always provided that he does not break, but accepts the burden of being marked out by God. So it's your responsibility to make that decision. And so for every prisoner of war camp commander and guard, for every Marine in the field who has to pull a trigger in some way, you're called upon to make that decision yourself, because you cannot accept unlawful orders. And in the same way, we cannot, as Americans, the Americans in this group, we cannot accept unlawful authoritarianism from our leaders. We have to accept that all of us have a different perspective on practically every topic in the world. None of us are the same. We all came up differently. And And so to have this logical approach, this logos approach that says, only my race is the right race and everybody else should be exterminated. Well, we tried that in World War II. Adolf Hitler tried that. And, if you're going to start exterminating people, then there are many people who are going to fight back. And so that's not an answer. It's not an answer. And so, the people that want to give us an authoritarian government are exactly not respecting the divinity in you. Okay. So, but recognizing that it's difficult if you're going to take on this position of God's decisiveness, then it's going to be painful, but that's what you're called upon to do as an adult. So in this way alone can the Imago Dei realize itself in him and God become man. So God became man in Jesus Christ, no doubt about that. But even in that passage, John 1:1-14, it says that the rest of us can become children of God, sons and daughters of God, if you will, ourselves. And it isn't by birth, it's by conviction. And that's what we must do. And we must figure out a way to get that done. All right. The seventh petition in the Lord's Prayer, but deliver us from evil, is to be understood in the same sense as Christ's prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, this is a reference to the night before he was crucified. My Father, if it is be possible, let this cup pass from me. Okay, and so what Christ was saying is he had a choice. He could have run away at that time and therefore not been crucified, but he recognized, and this is the divinity in him, that his justifiable position as the Son of God, that he had to go to the cross to demonstrate that this is the way, this is the way through life. We all have to face this suffering, and so he says, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. But we can't get out of it. In every marriage, there will be conflict. In every relationship, there will be conflict. And we have to find the ways around those relationships. And, sometimes those ways around are decided for us by fire and blood. And, we're seeing that with these people who've been murdered by young people in the last 2 weeks, that those people are actually sacrifices to wake us up, to make us understand that this is not right. This isn't the way we should live our lives. And what the NRA has done is completely obfuscated the meaning of the Second Amendment. The beginning of the Second Amendment, the first 4 words are a well-organized militia. Okay, so the purpose of the Second Amendment entirely is to create a well-organized militia. Now, how do these gunmen who buy these guns off the shelf, how are they part of a well-organized militia? They're not. Of course they're not. And we have a well-organized militia. We call it the National Guard. and so anything short of that, I think it's fine for us to come to a conclusion that we're entitled to have a firearm in our homes, but that's cold comfort, really. The truth is, if you have a pistol in your home, let's say, or any firearm, if somebody's breaking into your house, they're very likely armed. And do you happen to be in that moment in a place where your firearm is in arm's reach? Yeah, probably not. Pretty doubtful, unless you're physically not there. I've been thinking for a decade about the attack that Gabby Giffords was wounded in, and there was a man who was a good man. He was armed. He had a pistol on his hip, and there was a liquor store right behind where Gabby Giffords was speaking, and he heard the shots. He came running out, but he left his pistol in his holster. Why? Because right then the police were arriving. And if the police arrive and see you with a pistol in your hand, they're going to think that you're the one that's the perpetrator, and you're very likely to end up dead. So why do you think that having good people with weapons is a way to stop a mass shooting? It's just ridiculous. And yet that's the cockamamie story that we continually get from the gun lobby. And it's just they're telling you not the truth. Why? Because they want to sell lots more weapons. So now we have, one estimate said we have 400 million weapons in the United States. That's more than one for every person. And I have a friend who has 50 weapons, 50. And his justification for that is he wants to protect himself from his government, which is, again, a cockamamie story, because his government has F-18s, it has tanks, it has armored personnel carriers, it has switchblade drones, and the chance of my friend having any one of those weapons is not there. I mean, unless you have an airport in your front lawn, you're not going to have a fight against an F-18 in the end. And so so he has 50 weapons. He can only use one at a time, maybe two if he's a real cowboy and is two-gun Charlie. But why have the 50 weapons? It's a fetish, and it has nothing to do with reality. So okay. So again, referring back to Christ's petition in Gethsemane, Jung says, in principle, it does not seem to fit God's purpose to exempt a man from conflict and hence from evil. It is altogether human to express such a desire, but it must not be made into a principle, because it is directed against God's will and rests only on human weakness and fear. And fear is certainly justified up to a point. For to make the conflict complete, there must be doubt and uncertainty as to whether the man's strength is not being overtaxed. And so, you know, it's perfectly normal for soldiers who are going into combat to have fear. But it doesn't mean that that fear should stop them. And, you know, it's always nice to be trained like a Marine, because then you know that your brothers and sisters who are also Marines are going to do their best to protect you and to defend you as well as themselves. And this is true of every Marine you ever meet. I mean, even the piccolo player in the Marine Corps band, the president's own, is a infantryman first, and has to go annually and qualify on military weapons. And oh, by the way, one of the interesting things that most people don't know is that on military bases, we don't allow these young people, 18, 19 years old, to run around with M16s or with other military weapons unless they're actually using it for a purpose in training. Otherwise, those weapons are maintained in the armory and they're locked up. And so on Marine Corps bases, we don't have thousands of men that all are armed to the teeth and ready to go to war in a minute, because we know that there are accidents and that young people don't necessarily have the best common sense. And so all the weapons on a Marine Corps base pretty much are locked up. And yes, we have MPs that have weapons, but most of the troops and the officers, all of their weapons their weapons that they're issued by the Marine Corps are maintained in an armory. And this has always been true, even going back to medieval times. You've seen many scenes, presumably in movies, about medieval movies where there's a war going on and people run out and run to the armory and they grab a battle axe or a spear or something like that. And so it's the same concept that we've had since medieval times. Okay, now I seem to have ginned up some response here, so let me take a look. So Charlie Word says, to my understanding, Skip, firearms are to be kept under lock and key, licensed correctly, and whilst there is the argument of self-defense, which I fully agree to, however, how is it that cases arise where the perpetrator wins over the attack versus self-defense stance? And your discussion on Constitution, Jefferson, and the wording of separation of state and church was misconstrued, in which it belonged in terms of constitutional rights. I've just looked into some of this today as morality, the church and state stats of moral decline since separation of church and state, looking into stats of higher divorce rates, crime, etc. We're been watching you for a few weeks now and enjoy your insights last week on drugs and using the over 700,000 people reference. Okay, you know, the point is, if you're being attacked in your home, anybody that's attacking you in your home has the upper hand, no matter what. Chances are they're coming in while you're asleep and while you're not fully conscious of what you're doing. And so even if you have a pistol in the drawer next to you, And Dr. Jung had a pistol in his drawer next to his bedstand too. Chances are you're not going to get to that thing. And you might better ask for a better police force that prevents you from being attacked. I mean, you're better having an alarm that calls the police than having a pistol in your drawer, because the question is, can you get to it fast enough to use it? I think that one answer, Charlie, one simple answer would be that homeowners insurance would be a way to say you have to keep weapons under lock and key. And in Maryland, we do have laws that say that you have to keep firearms under lock and key, and that you're only allowed to carry them between your home and a shooting range and back directly. You can't stop at the grocery store, even if you have your pistol locked up in a case. But you know, if the insurance companies would simply say that your homeowner's insurance isn't valid unless your firearm is maintained under lock and key, or you know, it could be, you know, your long gun at least, because you know, maybe theoretically you could get to a pistol in your drawer and protect yourself. But if you're going to protect yourself with an AK-47, I mean, who keeps a long gun under their bed and, you know, loaded? Boy, that's a big mistake. And the truth is that, you know, a huge percentage of the suicides in this country are with weapons people have in their homes. And you know, I don't think we're better off by having those weapons. I'm not quite clear what your point is about church and state. You know, the issue about church and state at the time of Jefferson was that there were many religious people in the country. They weren't of all of one religion. There were already Jews and Catholics and Protestants. And my ancestry, I'm descended from 5 of the first 150 European settlers of Manhattan Island. And they picked up and got on a leaky boat in 1625 for one reason, and that was the 80 Years' War. And the 80 Years' War was a war in which the Spanish Catholics came to Holland every summer to try to beat the Dutch into coming back into the Catholic Church. And every fall, the Dutch would flood their country, and the Spanish would go back to sunny Spain for the winter. That went on for 80 years. Well, in the midst of that, one of my ancestors, who was the patriarch of all people named Conover, believe it or not, he's the source of everyone who uses the name Conover. He decided to pick up and move his family to the New World at a time when there were fewer than 150 settlers on Manhattan. And it was a trading post of the Dutch West India Company. And, you know, going in a boat, a leaky boat, can you imagine what it was like to sail across the Atlantic Ocean in a in a ship in 1625. It wasn't the Queen Mary, that's for sure. And and to leave your whole life behind, okay, leaving everything behind and just starting fresh in a new country, a new world. That was an incredible decision that many of our ancestors have made. In fact, all of our ancestors have made. I mean, even Native Americans came across the Bering Land Bridge, and so their ancestors all came from somewhere else too and made the difficult decision to come to the New World. They all did, every human being. And, you know, people argue about how long human beings have been in North America that ranges from 11,000 years to 35,000 years. But, you know, all human beings who came to North America came from somewhere else and had given up a home. And what ultimately we found in the New World is that we don't have to fight one another over religion. We can live in peace. And, you know, anybody that's living in America knows that, you know, most times, except when there's nut jobs with AK-47s or AR-47 or AR-15s, but most of the time, and that's 99.99999% of all the time, when you go to the grocery store, there are people of every faith and every color and creed, and we get along perfectly well. And there's no reason that we have to be separated in grocery stores and drugstores and movie theaters. We all get on quite well. And that's what we learned in North America. And so even though many of us, most of us probably descended from people, from ancestors who were escaping a religious war, in North America, we, by and large, haven't had to fight those religious wars. We've fought wars for other reasons. And, you know, we have a war against bigotry in the U.S., but it's not a religious war per se. I mean, nobody's mentioned what the faith was of the shooters in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas are. We don't know that. Let's see. Charlie goes on to say, I mean, tonight, this is as I had to try to comprehend how here in the UK, the church is no longer state funded, yet the statutes, laws, positions of authority that are all sworn in on the biblical oath. Well, here you don't, I don't know about Great Britain, but I can say that in the U.S., you don't have to be sworn in on a Bible or a Quran or any other sacred text. You can swear on your own oath, and that would be a secular oath. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by the timelines. If you're referring to my playlists, those are available on the homepage of this YouTube channel. There are over 1,300 videos on this YouTube channel, which I've created in the last 6 years. Actually, Wednesday, we begin the 7th year of this YouTube channel. And so I've created 1,300 videos, and it's a lot of material, obviously. And so like Dr. Jung's work, you just have to dive into it. And I have created playlists, and if you find them in the playlist tab at the top of the homepage, then you can find what you want. And if you wanted to follow all the videos from the beginning, I've created now 6 playlists, which start with the letters JRG, Jung Reading Group, and JRG 1 is the first year, and we're now working on JRG 6, and starting next week, we'll start on JRG 7. And in those playlists, I've tried to pretty much put the videos in order as I've presented them. But then there are videos or playlists that actually are a full reading of the Red Book. They're a full reading of Answer to Job, and many others. Of Answer to Job, and so on. So you can find them. And Kathy points out that police don't spontaneously appear after an alarm, maybe 30 minutes later. Kathy, I am very proud of the fact that we can trace our history back to the mid 16th century, to the mid 1500s. But I can't allow that to be an inflation, because the truth is that the patriarch of the Conovers, whose name was not Conover, it was actually Wolfert Gerritsen von Coenhafen. It means literally Wolfert, the son of Garrett. Von means from, or Van means from, and Coenhafen is the name of a small village that at the time in 1625 was 2 miles from the center of Amersfoort, Holland. So today it would be just a few blocks from Centrum in Amersfoort, Holland, and you could pass it in about 5 minutes, and you could easily walk it. But that man, and the name was anglicized, it's a different story, but that man is only 1/8120 of my bloodline, because you figure it out going back 13 generations from me. The 13th generation of first sons. And so if you multiply that out, I have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on going back. You find that I have 8,120 13 great grandparents, and he's only one of those, so I can't get too inflated about it. But it provides we Conovers with a context, and keep in mind that in 1657, the Dutch Navy won the Second Anglo-Dutch War. Okay, believe it or not, the Dutch beat the British, and Dutch were the sea power in those days, and so the Dutch won, and so in the treaty that ended the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the Dutch traded New Amsterdam, now New York City, traded away for Suriname. And so Holland got Suriname, and the British got New York, or New Amsterdam, which became New York. And you say, well, why did they do that? Well, in those days, the spice trade was the biggest deal. And so the Dutch were trading for the spices of Suriname. But the result of that is that about 20% of the Dutch population to this day have origins in Suriname, and about half of the Dutch soccer team has origins from Suriname. But anyway, in their infinite wisdom, the Dutch gave up this cold granite rock that we call New York City. And so many of the Dutch names became anglicized. So the British, the English couldn't pronounce Van Koenhaven very well. So they said, well, we're going to call you Conover. And so my first ancestor to take the name Conover was a man named Benjamin Conover, who was born in 1820. That's how the name came about. But in any case, it's a nice story. So Charlie says it being that fundamentally courts of law inauguration, the oath of the biblical referencing, whilst I respect all religions, also I am trying to understand where the state and church are no longer. Well, they are not in the oath necessarily. I mean, if we take an oath, and I've actually never taken an oath on a Bible, but I have taken the oath, and it's simply a personal commitment. And you raise your right hand and swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States. It's not an oath to any religion, and it's certainly not an oath to any religion, race, color, creed. It's an oath to the Constitution to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so we will be seeing how those oaths have played out in the last couple of years, because we're going to have the January 6th committee with their public hearings, and that's going to be very interesting to hear the perspectives of these people. But in the end, it can't be an oath to a person. So to the extent that it can't be an oath to a Führer. And so to the extent people have taken oaths to Donald Trump, on the basis of what? I mean, this is a guy who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His entourage is filled with yes men because nobody ever thought to question him. And anyway, or everybody's afraid to question him. And now that you mention it, yep, I recall seeing someone sworn in with the Quran, but I recall popularity of certain historical figures and the popularity of certain religions. And thank you. Yeah, well, we have all kinds of religions. We have, I urge everyone to look up on YouTube a poem called "To Kill an American." And in that YouTube video, the poem is recited by people of every race, color, and creed, because we Americans are unique in the world now, because we come from every race, color, creed, nation, national group, religion, you name it, any difference that you can think of. All of us have come from that. And we're committed to that. And it's this diversity that gives us our strength. Only that. It's only our diversity that gives us our strength. And it's because we do have clashes. And remember that you know, the supreme meaning comes from the clash of fire and blood. And so we have had a lot of fire and blood in this country. You know, other people can't understand why we have all these arguments all the time on television. But the reason is that we clash ideas together and we come up with something new. And we've been doing that for 400 years now. And so the result of all those millions of clashes is that we've created something very strong. And so as I look at the Russian army of conscripts, and I look at the U.S. Marine Corps, wow, what a difference. I mean, I can't even, I surely can't explain it, but you know, you know, at one time, there was another divisive time within my lifetime, which was the 60s. And there were racial tensions at that time. And in 1969, there was a racial conflict of some sort at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, the Marine Corps base for the 2nd Marine Division. And the commandant of the Marine Corps came out with a dictum that said, all Marines are green. And that was it. That was the end of it. And it was the end of separate training of Marines, separating blacks and whites, for example. And I had the sort of honor to give a final salute to a Marine Master Sergeant, a black Marine Master Sergeant, who had been the man who closed Montfort Point in 1971. And Montfort Point was the last Marine Corps training base separated by race. And so from 1969 on, the attitude was, you know, all Marines are green, and we're not going to tolerate any racial attitudes coming out in the Marine Corps, and we don't. And so if you go to Marine Barracks, Washington, D.C., and watch the evening parade, you will see every race, color, and creed in that group of Marines, in that battalion. And that is typical of the whole Marine Corps. And so, you know, these poor Russian soldiers who are just cannon fodder for Vladimir Putin, I really feel sorry for them in some way. But it doesn't mean that I don't think the Ukrainians should kill them. I think that it is important for the Ukrainians to win this war. And as that will involve killing Russians, then yes, I have to say that that's my decision based on my own mature evaluation of the situation. That's what I have to say about it. So yes, I agree with you, Kathy, but I'm not going to carry that on any further. So it's after 11 o'clock here in the East Coast. Do you know where your children are? I have been speaking for more than 2 hours without my counterpart. And so my voice is now given out, and I have a rehearsal this evening for our play that we'll be performing on the 12th of June. This is Confluence 22, I'm going to put the link to it into the YouTube chat. It's HTTPS confluence22.org. If you don't know of it, that is what we will be doing, a group of 6 of us, including 9 presenters. And we will have a presenter from India, a presenter, and literally from India. These people will be brought in by Zoom, a person from Gaza, and a person from Ethiopia, in addition to the normal organizers of the confluence. And what we've been talking about today is sort of the undercurrent of everything that we will be doing, which is we're looking for a way to resolve the spiritual malaise of the age, to give everyone a place to look for the future. And that is to look for it in our own unconscious, because therein is the healing power. And so when we talk about the collective unconscious, which is a Jungian concept, that's all Americans, regardless of race, color, creed, etc. And the answer has to come from the unconscious of this entire group. And if we do that, then we will really have something. And if we teach the U.S. Navy Chaplain Corps to support the spiritual needs of all Marines and all the people under their tutelage, it doesn't mean by offering church services. And you will see that actually in our play, because you'll see how the rabbi held his people together during 3 years in the concentration camp, when some of them were being taken off in transports to the east, which meant to the gas chambers of Auschwitz. How do you hold people together under such circumstances? It's a very, very difficult issue. And so on this YouTube channel, we will be attempting to broadcast events that are going on at the confluence starting on the 10th of June. There may be a couple preliminary broadcasts before that. And you'll be able to see them if you look at this YouTube channel and turn on your notifications. And, you know, this doesn't mean that I think that this YouTube channel can be a substitute for the confluence. I don't think that, because one of the main reasons of a get-together is so that people can interact with one another outside of the strict rules of, you know, formal presentation, and to learn from one another in various ways that are always serendipity and you can never predict them. And so if you're not coming, you're not going to have the opportunity to have those interactions, and I'm sorry about that. But anyway, we'll be able to give you a taste of what's going on at the confluence. And I will do my best to make that possible in every case. And so in any case, peace, and I will see you next week. We will be doing a session next Sunday, but that will be the last one for 2 weeks, as I'll be busy in the confluence activities the following week. But there will be live presentations on the YouTube channel that are not the reading of Answer to Job, but our confluence activities. So anyway, I hope you'll get a chance to see that. You know, I won't be able to respond to any chat at that time. And So anyway,